Well, hi everybody. Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. Welcome to let's call it a Saturday morning coffee with Cioffi weather show. As many of you may know, or perhaps you may not know, the last 2 nights have been hell. Okay, there's been some sort of internet issue, uh, which is fine all day until I start to set up live stream at about 6 o'clock at night, and the internet in my area was being slowed down for some reason. And apparently that happened again last night at around the same time. Sometime overnight and this morning, the whole area just crashed. And I had a signal for about 5 seconds. It went down. It's back up. And it's been fine. Everything is working. I'm all connected. So you know what? While I have luck on my side, we'll get this going here, and we're going to look at the short and long range. And just be advised that this thing could go out at any moment. So I can see everybody's on the chat. I know it's going to be a small crowd today, but again, apologies for what's happened over the last couple of days. And I'll get Rayo back probably for tomorrow morning for coffee with Cioffi. Okay, so let's get started with what's happening. I'm just going to bring up the U.S. satellite first, as this system swings in. And at the end of the day, when you look back at all the things that the weather models have been doing did with this in the longer range and what it's wound up being, it is astounding that you kind of get all wrapped up in the emotion with regards to what snow lovers want to see. And at the end, you wind up with a primary low that's up in the lakes, an occluded front with a low at the point of occlusion, and you're seeing mostly heavy rain swinging up the eastern seaboard. And that is pretty much what this winter has been all about, really, when you think about it. And you've got this large upper air circulation that's kind of swinging around in the Great Lakes, this sort of amorphous mass, and one good solid stick of heavy rain, and that is that. So once that gets out of the way, we are actually going to be in a fairly good shape beginning on Sunday and through much of next week until we get to next weekend, which is when, of course, all the chatter is surrounding what may or may not happen there. So we're going to talk about that as well. So let's look at some watches and warnings up, and there's really not a lot of going on at all across the U.S. You have a small area of winter weather advisories in upstate New York and in New England. There are some up for my what I guess I would call my close-up zone, eastern PA to southern New England, in a handful of counties in northeastern Pennsylvania and in northwest New Jersey. That's up until noontime. It's all about freezing rain in those areas. One of the things that came out of all of this was the fact that the arm of rain moved up so much slower, and instead of getting in here during the hours right before daybreak, it waited till after sunrise. So for the most part, even the coldest spots, north and northwest, which got that way because skies were clear for a good part of last night, saw their temperatures warm up to above freezing. So it's really very limited here in terms of who's getting impacted with some freezing rain. And on upstate New York and on up and through northern New England, it's a little bit of everything. The further north you go, there's maybe a little bit more snow involved, especially in elevated areas. Small area of winter weather advisories up in and around Chicago and Milwaukee. You can see it there in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. Little patch there up in northwestern Montana. A couple of spots we're dealing with a little bit of patchy dense fog. And that's it. There's really an absolute absence of major storm activity across the United States. We seem to be in a rather calm setup. Now, here's the radar this morning. The upper system is clearly obvious on the satellite with that swirl that's rotating counterclockwise back around the Great Lakes, and that arm, as I pointed out, and that point of occlusion arm that is lifting up the East Coast with some very heavy rains. It's a relatively narrow band here, so we're talking about a 6 to 8 hour shot of an inch to an inch and a half of rain. Much of it is moving northward while the area is only sliding slowly eastward. So I think once the rain gets in here, once the rain starts in your particular area, plan on a good solid 6 to 8 hours worth And then weather conditions will probably start to improve late this afternoon and into this evening. Elsewhere, down in Florida, we've got some broken showers off the Florida southeast coast and out into the coastal waters in the Florida Straits. There's a little bit of snow back through parts of Wisconsin and then down into northeastern Illinois and northwestern Indiana. And then, of course, you've got that rain out there. And the Northwest continues to be very busy here with respect to rainfall. There's been a ton of it there. And here's the Weather Prediction Center's 7-day forecasts. By the way, what you see pretty much in the east, this is through to next Saturday. So a lot of this is front end loaded. We'll have to see what they come up with in their forecast after this storm system is over. Be curious to see what they have for the end of the week. You could also see moisture gathering again in the Gulf states, and that is going to be the low for late next week and early next weekend. That may or may not impact the east coast of the U.S. And of course, you've got this mess in the Pacific Northwest, and we're talking about 5-inch plus rain amounts over the next 7 days, even some 7-inch plus rain amounts over the next 7 days in Washington and in Oregon. So busy there and just about dry everywhere else we look. Also, from the standpoint of looking ahead, I'm going to come back to the WPC's 4 to 7 day winter weather forecast. By the way, I can see the chat. I got you guys I'm watching, and nice to see Timothy Veltman here. Places in the I-95 corridor are only 6 to 10 inches below average, and well, that's true, Timothy. That is the case. Except that usually, if this is going to be this is going to wind up being an above average year. Usually, you're doing pretty well at this point by the end of January. At the very least, you should have had about 20 to 25 inches. So we know we're not going there. So it really comes down to having now. You're going to have to bring it to get it to normal. You're going to have a gangbusters February and also a very active March. To do it. And frankly, if you look at the weather pattern the way it is, it's just kind of gone against it. You're really going to have to go against everything that's been happening so far. Always and Christopher, yeah, that's a good one. You're always one snowstorm away from being average or even above average, and the problem is always going to be trying to get that one snowstorm. So let's look at the new NAM, which is out. And it has that arm of rain swinging through. You see the low up near the Great Lakes, the snow as the NAM sees the radar, light snows in and around the Great Lakes, and then that arm moves out to the northeast. Tomorrow, it's going to be about slowly improving weather conditions, a little bit of lake effect going on in western Pennsylvania and in southwestern New York, and also in northeastern New York, east of Lake Ontario. It's nice to see that the air will, at least for snow lovers, the air will at least be cold enough that your lake effect is not going to be producing rain. So that's a plus. And then as we move on into next week, there really isn't too much happening here. We do have a weather system as we get into Wednesday. There's there's lower pressures down in the Western Gulf. It is. I've been kind of struggling with the temperatures next week because of the fact that uh, it it's decent enough in terms of dry air. It's also not too shabby when it comes to chilly air either. I mean, it's not going to be Arctic cold, but when the atmosphere is cold enough for rain and snow, and you look at that 540 thickness line down into Virginia, North Carolina, this is chilly air. It's not quite. I would not classify it as dirty cold air. This is a bit better than that. On the other hand, it's clearly not Arctic air, but it's just cold enough to at least bring temperatures that'll be relatively seasonal, maybe a shade above in some places and a shade below in others. Now you'll notice that you've got a low that's coming out of the Gulf states here on the GFS that runs across the Gulf over Florida around Wednesday night, Thursday, and runs out to the east. Then you have a second round of energy, and it's from this that you start to generate a low off the southeast coast. And on this particular run, the models were, it's all really about the timing here in the long range. And on this particular run, there is energy in the northern stream, energy in the southern stream. So you wound up with a low basically out at about almost 40 and 65, way out. Okay. This, by the way, conflicts with the 0Z run from last night, which develops a well-developed low in the Gulf of Mexico, runs it actually up the west side of the Appalachians to Pittsburgh, bringing rain all the way up almost to northern Maine. You know, when it gets to Pittsburgh, the low redevelops to the east and then goes out, and then it turns colder and drier behind it. So you might look at this and you could say, okay, well, why the big switch from run to run to run? And it really boils down to how the models are handling the whenever you have one stream to deal with uh, as far as energy is concerned in the jet, watching the jet stream, you you know, it's a little easier. There's less room for error. It's one stream. Okay, then you just look at what's behind it, you look at what's ahead of it. But when you have two streams that you're dealing with, then it becomes a bit more problematic because you're suddenly having to deal with huge timing issues, and the speed of one jet is rolling faster than another. So you've got models reacting by uh, phasing these two streams on one run and then not phasing it in another, or perhaps on one run, one stream is overpowering the other one where it flattens it out and you don't get much development. So expect this dance that we're going to continue. I don't think that would be any surprise to anybody here, but just to kind of start it off, you have, you know, your southern part of your jet is up here. You have your Canadian part of the jet well to the north, and this is the jet stream for tomorrow. But you do have a little up that our storm system that'll be clearing out, and of course there's just a little bit of flow here coming down out of Canada early tomorrow. But as we go into next week, that flow is going to continue a bit, and it'll allow for things to get colder. And you'll notice now when we get to Thursday, the split nature is pretty evident here. So you've got this southern part of the jet with this strong short wave, and of course you also have the north being relatively busy. So it winds up being how each model run times things out. There's one thing I will point out through all of this is this, okay? And this is ugly. All right. I mean, this is ugly from the standpoint of cold air because the Arctic region still remains, you know, pretty much locked up. Occasionally, you might see a little bit of cold air bleeding southward, but as we saw this week. But other than that, you're going to have a problem. You've got to get rid of this whole complex up here. And unfortunately, what it has been an exercise really is in torture for snow lovers because we get these odd runs every day or so where we saw one that this happened yesterday where the GFS actually destroyed this whole vortex setup up in the Arctic region, and it looked, you know, really kind of interesting after day 10. But that's the problem. It always is after day 10, and it never happens. So let's get back to this particular storm system. And you'll see that you've got the timing of the short waves. Here is the GFS. This is for Saturday. You just finally have some broad troughing and phasing, but the trough, you know, it kind of phases when it's already near the coast. So all the energy at this point is well offshore, and then that lifts out, and you start to go into the longer range, and you begin to think, okay, it might look better. This was the 0Z run, and of course you'll notice that instead on this particular run, the GFS drops the troughing, deep trough out in the west. You've got a flow from Canada into New England and a flat ridge in the eastern United States. I mean, it's not a particularly terrible looking upper air, but you know the problem is that this was going to lift up and out. So more than likely, if you were to extend this, you're going to wind up with a deep trough in the west and a ridge in the east. But again, that's day 10. So the only thing about this I would just say is just from a cynic standpoint is the fact that it's showing the trough in the west and ridge in the east probably increases the chances of the GFS being correct, because if it was the other way around, you know darn well it won't happen. That's just the way, that's kind of like the rules of forecasting when you take that sort of cynical angle. Now, here's the European, and the interesting thing about the European is, with the standpoint for whatever's going to happen late next week and next weekend, is the fact that it times everything differently, so you get a bit of a different look. And this is our jet stream for Monday. You see the split nature on the European as well. It takes a little bit longer to get the system in the south to move along to the east, and you'll notice, by the way, that it times the northern stream differently. So with the European, you actually wind up with an interesting scenario in that it has a low. Just to show you here, this and I don't want to. I didn't have time to kind of set up the maps of the other ones, but the bottom line is it has a low in the north central Gulf on Friday night, which is off the Carolina coast east of Hatteras. As you can look at the isobars, you see where they're pointing. They're pointing out to the northeast, and we're seeing a nice trough into the Great Lakes, moving down into upstate New York and Pennsylvania. So that's actually suppressing all of this. So you're going from one particular mess to the other. And here's the, let me bring the upper air here. There you go. So here's your upper air. So you see how the southern part of this jet is just kind of totally suppressed here because the north overwhelms it. That's the Europeans' view to it. And I'm just going to tell you, you're not, whatever the next run does is what the next run does. And you're just going to have to realize that whatever it is, it'll probably be undone to a certain extent in the run that follows. One other thing I do want to point out is just because we've been kind of we're sort of liking WPC, the Weather Prediction Center, and their forecast. So at least in the long range, gives us maybe a good handle on what's happening going forward. Now, this is the probability of snow, and this is on their last day, so this is pretty far out in the long range, clearly. This is for the period from Friday into Saturday, Friday morning, January 31st, to Saturday morning, February 1st. The highest probability of at least a quarter of an inch of liquid that forms as snow, or that falls as snow or sleet. And I would suspect that it's out 7 days. A 10 to 30% probability map is about as much as I would think to see here, and that's what you got. But you have a fairly large area where WPC is sort of looking at all of this and looking what all the models are doing, and going with that particular idea of a 10 to 30% chance. So just inland north and west of New York City, down into southwest Jersey, and points further south to Washington, D.C., Baltimore from there, north and west. This looks a little bit more I-95 corridor-ish, if you want to put it in those terms, but we'll see. And, one other thing. Let's just wrap this up. As far as rainfall is concerned for today, we're looking at rainfall amounts on the order of about an inch to an inch and a half. And of course, where you see some of the lower numbers, that is on top of whatever's already fallen. So if you haven't started rating yet, just look for probably about an inch to an inch and a quarter, maybe a few isolated amounts that wind up getting to an inch and a half or so. And from the standpoint of ice, while it is still falling, we have some minor ice accumulation in northeastern Pennsylvania and northwest New Jersey going on until about noontime. I tend to, looking at the temperature profile, it's hard for me to find anybody that's under 32 to cause some serious freezing rain problems, if you ask me. And then a little bit of icing running up the Hudson Valley and in northeastern New York and parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, which is a little odd, but that does happen some from time to time. And with respect to total snowfall, and we'll widen this out. It's really this is minor nonsense here. A 1 to 4, 1 to 3, 2 to 4 inch snow event for most. A little bit higher up in northern and northwestern Maine. Also a little bit higher in parts of upstate New York. But this is through Tuesday morning. So there's some lake effect stuff that's going to be added to this east of Lake Ontario, southwestern New York, northwestern PA. You're seeing, coating to a couple of inches there, and generally a coating to an inch or so in and around the Great Lakes. And we always like to look at the West because that's where these days that's where we're getting all the big numbers, and we're still getting some pretty big numbers up in the Pacific Northwest and on up into parts of the Rockies. So it's 10:09, and I haven't lost the live stream yet. That's a good thing. I'm very happy here. So not too shabby for a Saturday morning, but the idea that I went Thursday and I was gonna. The odd thing is, I actually was planning to take Friday off on the live stream, just because when you live stream every day and all the other stuff I'm doing, it's sometimes it gets a little hard to muster up energy to go at it night after night to put on an hour show. So I, take a little break, and that works. So when I couldn't get the internet signal up on Thursday, I said, okay, well, Thursday's the break day then, and we'll be back up on Friday. But then it happened again yesterday, and it was just so. When I tell you how frustrating it is, you come to depend on making sure you get online, and you can't. It's really a problem. Let's see. So we've got. Let's see. We got a Briller observation here. Pointing out that by the average highs are going to start to climb now, which is true, but they only inch up through the month of February to an extent. I mean, by the time you start the month at around 40, you finish the month at about 44 or 5. The big acceleration begins in March. So, but just remember that with the rise with the rise of the normal temperatures, also it comes usually with the rise in chaos in as far as the atmosphere is concerned, and that's when you start to get volatility, and you can wind up getting into more storminess. So yeah, we'll see what the pattern holds. I mean, at this stage of the game, you're almost to February 1st here. It's hard to imagine uh, it changing so radically that suddenly we're going to go into this like mega snow pattern. It doesn't seem to want to do it, and I would just bet against it. You find yourself just kind of looking at this from a run to run standpoint, and the change just never occurs. So what you basically have to look for is you get these windows of opportunity where everything times out absolutely perfectly. That usually is the case most of the time with snowfall, no matter where you're located, except in the places like in and around the Great Lakes, where lake effect is usually something more automatic, and up in maybe parts of the mountains in the Pacific Northwest, where just it just snows up there. That's just the way it is. For everybody else, it's always a matter of timing and getting the weather system and the cold air to kind of match up. Separate streams in the jet stream, connecting or not connecting. Sometimes it's better that they don't connect rather than connect and phase. So I just find it. I find it hard to imagine that we're suddenly going to um, have a just an absolutely terrific pattern. I mean, stranger things have happened, but we'll see. So, Brandon Doherty, you set up a fan page on Facebook for the Joe and Joe Weather Show. That's so cool. That's great. Thank you. I'm going to find it and share it. That's quite awesome. And I appreciate it greatly. So I see David McCain is up online this morning, forever waiting for something to happen in Youngstown, Ohio. Norm Roberts, nice to see you. Pamela Gasper, Okie AG, making an appearance here on a Saturday morning. John Trabacchino. Phil is saying we have no choice but to exercise patience. Yeah, the only problem is that starting February 1st, the clock does start to tick. So you're down to a solid 6 weeks unless the pattern is perfect, and then you can make it um, want to extend it an extra week or so. But you know the month of January is just about done, and the snowfalls in the I-95 corridor anyway, and through much of the Northeast have been pretty lacking this month. But we'll see if it changes up on the fly or not. By the way, the European last night, it went from giving a foot to a foot and a half of snow for next weekend on the run before that, on the day run, to giving absolutely nothing on last night's run. Just so you know, there's a little stripe of snow in southern Virginia and northernmost North Carolina because of how far it has the surface low, and then that's it. So that's why you don't get wrapped up in snowfall forecast maps. So just interesting thing with respect to the teleconnections, and then I'm going to wrap it up because I do have things to do today. So here's where did he go? Ah, I have it hidden behind me. So I just got the connections are up. Again, this is a snapshot from last night's run of the models. And hopefully the signal holds. So suddenly your PNA goes negative, and that could be troughing in the west. Your NAO actually goes neutral to a little bit negative. So that's your system for next weekend. And the EPO, the East Pacific Oscillation, is actually, I would regard it as almost off the wall positive for the middle part of this week, and then it stays fairly strongly positive, but downtrends toward the end of the period. And I would not, I'm not really quite sure what to conclude of that, other than the fact that it probably means that everything that's been happening is going to continue to happen in pretty much the same way. So just watch for your timing. I'm seeing there's a weakness in the signal, so I think I'm going to say goodbye. Thanks for being here today. Glad we got a live stream up. And we'll probably see you tomorrow morning with Joe Rayo on Coffee with Cioffi. Goodbye, everybody.